And how we start this off is with the third step prayer, which is on page 63, if you'd like to follow along. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. All right. Okay, well, we just finished up Dr. Bob's Nightmare last Saturday, and thank you again, Bill, for taking the lead on that. It was an exceptional session. I've recorded it, and it is available via YouTube. I have to try and find that link if you're interested in following along with that. Just let me know, and I'll get that out to you. But nonetheless, it's out there. So that brings us to the very beginning of the big book. So without any delay, we'll talk and open the book to the very first page, which is the title page, Alcoholics Anonymous. This is our basic text. That is our program of recovery. It's the foundation by which we all have worked to recover. And we use this book, the first portion, and I'll repeat this again a couple of times here. It's the book. It's not the first 164 pages. It includes much more than that. But we do include the 164, but there's stuff that isn't included in the 164 pages that I want to make sure that we've covered and don't miss. So Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm turning the page now to the next page, and Hank Parkhurst and Joe Warden named Alcoholics Anonymous. They were thinking of this book. There was a couple of other titles that they considered. One was 100 Men. The other one was The Way Out. And the third one was considered was the Bill W. Movement. So the first promise is right there, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. The most important part of that statement is the story. And I underlined have recovered. We'll cover that a couple of times as well. In this book, it's noted several times where the first 100 have recovered. So with that, there is some discussion about whether or not you actually recover from alcoholism or not. The bottom line is that, and Rob has a great statement that he usually posts. I don't have it with me, but it is basically that we're always going to be alcoholics. That doesn't change. Once you're, admitted that you've an alcoholic, the bottom line is that you're always going to be an alcoholic. But you can, and I believe that based on what the book says and what I've experienced is that you can recover from alcoholism, meaning that I don't have the urge anymore. I still have the allergy. I'll always have that, meaning that, if I was to take a drink, it will trigger the allergy and I will just start drinking and not stop until I've either run out, I've passed out, or otherwise. But there is stuff we'll talk about this again as we go forward, that we have recovered from alcoholism. And this is what we call the solution, this book. Again, I'll cover in more detail what we're talking about as far as the first portion of the book, but this is the solution to our alcoholism recovery. And this many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism is a collective understanding. So not to confuse that, but this is a collective understanding. This is the 4th edition that we're working from. And right underneath there, Kickin, you had mentioned it, but I go ahead and talk about it. You know, there's the circle with the triangle and AA in the middle of that. And then on either side of the triangle is unity, service, and recovery. And as Kickin put it so nicely this morning when we were first coming online, without recovery, everything falls apart. So that's an important element. All of them are important, including service, because that's part of this, and we repeat it many times, that service to others is what keeps us truly sober and in a state of recovery. And AA is not a treatment for alcoholism. AA has a solution for alcoholism, and there's a big difference there. So this is not a treatment for alcoholism. That would be something that medical professionals and others would do. This is a solution for alcoholism. Bill, do you have anything to add to that page?
Bill Alcoholic, you pretty much covered it. The only thing I'll add, like you talked about recovered, it says thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. The book always uses the word recovered. 17 times it uses it. So I go along with recovered because that's what the book says. And my understanding of recovered, it doesn't mean you're cured. It just means you got better. It's like if you have a cold and your nose is all clogged up and you're sneezing, you're in the process of recovering from the cold. Once those symptoms are gone, you've recovered from the cold. That doesn't mean you're cured and you can never catch a cold again. It just means you got better. That's all. You got better mentally and physically. The physical part is in remission, and the mental part should be gone at this point. That's what recovered means. So, and like you mentioned, the circle and triangle, in the fourth edition, it's not there. You would have to draw it in there yourself. It was removed in 1994 for some kind of copyright complications. And that basically, that was a good symbol, and Bill didn't invent it. He found it somewhere. It's been around for a real long time, probably thousands of years. And he put the circle and triangle there, and on each side of the triangle, he put one of the three legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous: unity, service, and recovery. So if you have those three things, you got your best chance of staying sober. That's pretty much what's on this here title page. Thanks for letting me share.
Oh, thank you, Bill. All right, so we'll turn the page, and we're looking now at the table of contents. I'll note here that this book is an instruction manual. It's not really fiction or nonfiction. Service to others is the instruction, so we keep that over and over. But this is, in fact, an instruction manual for recovering from alcohol. So, with the table of contents, really on this page, and I write a couple of things in here, is the first portion of this book. So, off to the left, I put a parenthetical first portion. It includes, I wrote in the title page. It includes the preface, the 4 forewords to each of the editions, the doctor's opinion, which is so important, and then the first 11 chapters, or the 11 chapters that are in there, and plus the appendices on page 567, spiritual experience. So the first portion of the book, again, is the title page, the preface through chapter 11, plus the appendix on page 567, the spiritual experience. To the right of the page, I wrote in these the steps, so and or some of the information here. So the preface, the forward to the first 4 editions are good information and history of the book, just general information and history. Starting with the doctor's opinion through chapter 3, more about alcoholism, is really step one. So those four sections: doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, and more about alcoholism. We agnostics is step two. How it works is step 3 and 4. Into action is steps 5 through 11. And working with others is step 12. And the four, as they say, the four forgotten chapters, which are so important to sponsors and those that are working with alcoholics, whether that be friends or family. 2 wives, the family afterward, 2 employers, and a vision for you are steps 8 through 12. And again, those 4 chapters are also very good instructional chapters for sponsoring other people. And then at the bottom, I put that going through this is really practicing the principles through all our affairs. It's important. Now, a lot of people that do big book studies don't cover Dr. Bob's Nightmare, but in this particular big book study, between Bill and Rob and myself, we have decided that Dr. Bob's Nightmare is just as important as Bill's story in the front. So I think it's got a lot of very good information. And as one of the co-founders of AA, we actually cover that. Is there anything you want to add to that page, Bill?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, when it talks about Dr. Bob's story, it says the birth of our society dates from his first day of permanent sobriety. That's how AA established the AA birthday. When AA started, the first day that they had 2 guys that had permanent sobriety, and they used the date June 10th. I know there's a little bit of controversy over whether it was the 10th or the 17th, but the book says the 10th, so we'll go along with the 10th. So the first day that you're sober, that's when you can start counting your days. You don't have to wait like 2 or 3 days to detox or whatever. The first day the alcohol is out of your system. Dr. Bob had 1 beer in the morning of June 10th, so the alcohol was out of his system within about an hour or so after he drank that beer. And that's the day that they consider he had permanent sobriety. So if you had 1 drink in the morning, you would be sober sometime during that day. And that's when you can start counting your days. But I would check it with my sponsor, whatever your sponsor tells you. If your sponsor wants you to go to the next day or whatever, it's not a big deal, but that's the way AA does it. I just thought I'd point that out. Okay, thanks for letting me share.
You bet, Bill. Thank you, sir. All right. So we'll turn the page to page VI 6. I put it this particular section is part 1. It's part of part 1, and these are the low bottom drunks. I wrote that in at the top. The story on page 1 is, I'm sorry, the first story there is Alcoholics Anonymous number 3, which is Bill Dodson. Gratitude in Action is Dave Bancroft. Women Suffer Too is Marty Mann, who we'll talk about to some extent in the later chapters with regard to the Marty Mann, or the Mann experiment. Our Southern Friend is Fitz Mayo, very, very active AA member. The Vicious Cycle, number 5, is Jim Burwell. Number 6, Jim's Story, is Jim Scott. And The Man Who Mastered Fear is Archie Trowbridge. And then He Sold Himself Short is Earl Treat. And number 9 is Sylvia Kaufman. Bill, do you have anything you want to add to that page?
No, you pretty much hit it on that.
Okay. The high bottom drunks, unfortunately, I only have a couple of names, a couple of 4. I guess I have 4. So part 2 is the high bottom drunks. I have number 2 is the fear of fear, is Cecil Kulkoff. I think that's Cuilcof. Number 4, physician heal thyself, is Dr. Earl M. And that's all I have for that page. The next page, number 9, is Chester Rood. And then down towards the bottom, number 16 was acceptance was the answer, Dr. Paul Ollinger. So, Bill, you might have a couple of extra names in there.
No, that's all I have. I don't have any more. As you get further on in the book, it's harder for them to find the people's names because a lot of the people are still alive and they want to be anonymous.
Right.
The first portion of the first group of them, all of those people are gone, so their families or whatever put their names out. And some of the later ones, we don't know who they are. Some of them we do, some of them we don't.
Gotcha. Okay. So part 3, which is on page IX, is low bottom drunks again. So it's another group of low bottom drunks. Down on number 7 is Bob K. You turn the page to page 10. Number 10, I'm sorry. Yeah, page 10X. And it's number 10 is Beth H. And then number 11, something more personal to my situation, although I didn't go through it like this particular gentleman did, is Grounded, and that is Lyle Prowse. He has a book out under a similar title, but it is he was flying airlines drunk and got caught and was stripped of all of his ratings and his licenses, and was very much a pariah within the aviation community. He worked his way back, and after some time, a long time, he was able to get his license and his ratings back and was able to fly again. It's a great story, and Lyle Prowse. You can look him up. He's got a great book, I think, about the whole AA situation, and it's just a really good story. Bill, did you have any other names?
The only thing I have is number 2, who lived only to drink. That guy's name was Phil Parker.
Bill.
And I think Lyle Prowse's book, the name of the book was Final Approach. So, and like you said, that's a really good story. And number 12 was Bertha V. And the number 14, Freedom from Bondage, was Win Quorum Laws. And number 15 was Bob T. Every now and then I run across another name.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with the preface now. It's the preface. A couple of things that I like to talk about here is that this book is more than it's more than a book designed to transfer information. You need more than knowledge to get sober. So it really does explain the program very nicely. And the solution is, again, more than just book knowledge. It includes a lot of work in order to get sober. So this preface is another thing I'll note here is a book designed to enable you to have a spiritual experience large enough to affect a change for recovery. It's a book designed to enable you to have a spiritual experience large enough to affect a change for recovery. So, Bill, if you'll go ahead and get started reading, if you don't mind.
Okay. All right, the preface, page XI. This is the 4th edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off the press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 copies in all formats. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, describing the AA recovery program, has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor.
Okay, so a couple of things that I highlighted. Because of this book has become the basic text for our society, has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. There is this strong sentiment, and I underline this, against any radical changes being made in it. And again, when we talk about the first portion of this book, it is inclusive of the things that I had already talked about here with the title page, the forwards, the preface and the forwards to the first, second, third, and fourth edition, chapters 1 through 11, and the spiritual experience on page 567, the appendix back there. Also, I think that a couple of popular people out there got their start with the book, and it's Joe and Charlie. That's how they started their talks, was using the big book. So if you haven't heard of Joe and Charlie, you can still look them up. They've got some really great recordings out there. They're humorous and a lot of fun to listen to. Bill?
This tells us, like you mentioned, this is the basic text. That means it's a book to be studied. You're supposed to learn something from it. It's not a novel or a fiction or a nonfiction. It's considered a textbook, and we're supposed to learn something from it. And it tells us that the first portion of the volume is where it describes the AA recovery program. That's where the recovery program is, in the first portion of this volume. The back portion of the book is all stories, and there's really no recovery there. You might pick up one or two little, spiritual exercises that they went through. But the first portion is where the recovery program is, and that's what we use so that we can go through this process and get better. And it tells us also that they don't want to change the book. We're not supposed to change this book. This book is supposed to change us. That's all I got. Thanks.
Okay. Go ahead and start with the next paragraph, sir.
Okay, the next paragraph on the bottom of page XI. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and directions for getting in touch with AA. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles, and 30 completely new stories were added. And the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the 3rd edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added.
Okay, so you can see that a lot of change is happening to the back portion of the book, the second portion of the book. I'm sorry, and as they went along, it looks, there is some of the stories are retained, some of them are eliminated, and then it's so to keep the book somewhat fresh. But again, the first portion of the book is largely unchanged and intact. Bill?
Okay, this 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to 2 that were transferred to Part 1. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too.
Yeah, so I put a asterisk here with regard to the very end here, which is, yes, that happened to me. Yes, I felt like that, or yes, I believe this program can work for me too. You can actually change those into questions. Did this happen to me? Have I felt like that? And do I believe this program can work for me? That pretty much covers the preface. Bill, did you have anything you wanted to add for this last part?
No, like you said, pretty much all they did is they changed some of the stories, took some out, added some new ones, switched them around a little bit. And that's just so that they represent the current membership. That's all that was about.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go to the forward to the first edition.
Yep.
Oh, okay, page XIII. Forward to the first edition. This is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
Okay, so a couple of things here. First of all, this first paragraph is one that is repeated over and over and over again. It's very important. I'll start with what I would call that this book is really three sections, and it is the problem. It's the admission and the identification of a problem itself. There is the solution, otherwise what it provides or prescribes. And then there's the course of action. It's the application of this program and solution going forward. And so when I look at this, I look at we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered. And again, there's that word recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It's one of the first times. It is the first time that we talk about the mind and body as the two symptoms of alcoholism, and we'll learn much more about that later on. It's whose understanding? It's their understanding, not ours. I also highlighted and underlined, many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Most people look at us and think that we have just not got the strength or the willpower or the ability just to say no, and that they don't understand that it's much more than that. So I highlighted and underlined the very sick person. It's something that needs to be reinforced with those that are non-alcoholics, especially if they're going to be around a recovering alcoholic, and to help them understand it better. I also underlined our way of living has its advantages for all, and it's not I've seen and heard where people actually give this book to people, and it's just a good way to approach life as a whole. So we focus on just the alcohol and the alcoholism and the program of recovery with the solution as it is in the book, but there are a lot of applications beyond just recovering from alcohol that this book covers and becomes a part of people's everyday lives. And if it would be nice if everybody lived like this. Bill?
Yeah, it talks about here to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. That's the purpose of the book, to show other alcoholics how we recovered. And we refers to the first 100. So we're not included in that because we weren't around when this book was written. So basically the purpose of this book is to help other alcoholics to get better, to achieve sobriety. That's what the book is about. The book is not about helping everybody else. It's specifically about helping an alcoholic. And that's the main purpose. And there's a secondary purpose. And it says, we hope that our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. So like a secondary purpose is so other people can understand an alcoholic and not put us down all the time. And maybe they'll try to help us also. So, but the main purpose is to help the alcoholic get sober. That's really what this whole book is about. All right, want me to continue reading?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to admit his personal name, designating himself instead a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I skipped a paragraph. Did I?
Yep, you did. So it's
yes, I did. Okay, let me back up. Excuse me, my mistake here. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to admit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yep. And so this is another important point, and obviously the name Alcoholics Anonymous is part of this, and the anonymity is paramount to the success of this program. Too many people might ridicule, make fun of, take advantage of, et cetera, of people if they were to if we were to know who people were and not us. as far as the group Alcoholics Anonymous, but those outside of the program. So we keep things anonymous so that it protects the members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill?
Yeah, the book talks about the anonymous part of the program here, and being anonymous is so important. It's half of our name. That's why we're Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how important anonymous is. And basically, the reason we're anonymous is because we don't want to hurt AA. It's not so somebody might find out that I'm an alcoholic. It's because if I break my anonymity and then I go back out and drink, I could give AA a black eye and make AA look bad. That's why it's important. All right, the next paragraph. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted.
Okay, so this is an important paragraph here where it says we are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever, and it is no requirement for that. Now, obviously people do collect money in some of the groups, most of the groups, and use that to subsidize either the rent that is required for a room to meet. It could be for the coffee and donuts and cookies that are provided. It also helps to offset costs associated with books and literature and coins, chips, if you will. But that is totally voluntary. It's not a requirement. And the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. It's important to note this because for a while, early on, as I've anecdotally been told or heard, is that there were over 100 different rules and requirements in order to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was getting so stringent and it was so narrow focused that it was hard for people to come into AA. And so they finally were able to come down to just one requirement, and that is the honest desire to stop drinking, which I think is an incredibly important one for being inclusive of all who are afflicted, which is what it says in that last sentence. Bill?
Yeah, this part of the book here, this is probably where the preamble came from. The preamble was written by the editor of The Grapevine, and I believe it was 1958 when they took honest desire out of the preamble. And now the preamble just says a desire to stop drinking. They took honest out of it because they thought that might scare people away. All right, the last two paragraphs on page XIV. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced to work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies are welcome. Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yep. So they obviously we share what we know of the book, and through our work with other alcoholics. So that is a constant that gets shared in the meetings, the fellowship itself. And we'll talk about the difference between the fellowship and the program later. That is step 12, working with other alcoholics. So it's a reference to that, and we will see that time and time again. And the inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies is always welcomed. A lot of those groups have embraced the program and have admitted that in certain cases, most cases, with regard to that finding that inner strength, that spiritual experience, is something that is beyond the norms, if you will, with regard to science, medicine, and religion. And I also want to point out something, that this is a we program and not a me program. So I think that that's important to note at the end here. In fact, we is used 18 times in the book. So it's an important note to make going forward. Bill?
Yeah, like you mentioned, we is used 18 times in this forward. So it's important to understand that we stay sober and I get drunk. That's pretty much what it is. And this here, second to last paragraph, talks about working with other alcoholics. We're not even into the steps yet. We haven't got to step one yet. And this book is already talking about the importance of working with others. So that's going to be an important theme all throughout this book. Okay, move on to the next forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay, page XV, forward to the second edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encouraged us by saying that this is but a beginning, only an augury of a much larger future ahead.
Yep. So I think it's like I highlighted a couple of things. You know, this book in 1955, they had 6,000 groups, 150,000 recovered alcoholics. So very well, at the time was an explosion of people. Now it pales in comparison to the number of recovered alcoholics throughout the world. Bill, do you have anything to add to those?
Now they're just showing here how AA grew. It was getting bigger and bigger. Like you said, it was like an explosion here. Okay, the next paragraph on XV. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June of 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
So there's a lot of good information here. First AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June of 1935. We talked about this a little bit during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. That's Dr. Bob and Bill W. And 6 months earlier, this was also a reference to Bill W. His experience in following a meeting with an alcoholic friend. That's Ebby Thatcher. That is this alcoholic friend that had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. We'll go into a lot more detail about Dr. William D. Silkworth, and it does point out and introduce him here more formally. And this is also important. Bill W. was a part of the Oxford group, and it was his decision that he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups. Part of their general requirements is they focused on middle and upper class people, and they were a little bit resistant to any other socioeconomic levels of folks to being a part of the Oxford group. The good news is that some of the things that they believed in, Bill took with him, which was the need for a moral inventory, or the inventory that we do in step 4, confession of our personal defects, which is step 5, and restitution to those harmed, which is step 9, and then helpfulness to others, which is step 12. So we're already starting to reference different steps, even if we haven't gotten the steps yet, but those are the steps that are covered that were brought from the Oxford group. Bill?
Yeah, this is the only place in the book where it mentions the Oxford groups. It's just right here in this one paragraph. And that's where Bill got the ideas for most of the steps. He got them from the Oxford groups, from the spiritual exercises or spiritual principles that the Oxford groups were using. Okay, the next paragraph. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician.
Again, we're talking about Bill W. and Dr. Bob. It's a little bit of history here. I'm in the process of reading the AA Comes of Age, which I think is an excellent follow-on book to read once you've been through the big book and you have gone through the solution and are on your own program of recovery. There is some details in that book that certainly help to add context to what we're reading here. This is really just a very high-level summation of what actually happened, and there are a lot of interesting details that go with it. But the idea here is that it's the first time that we have a noted person who has decided that in order to stay sober, they needed to go and talk to another alcoholic. And if you haven't done that, you should, because if you've been able to carry this message forward and do step 12, you'll find that every time you do that, it really reinforces the strength of your sobriety and your recovery. So it is a very important note here to show the first time that step 12 quote was really being utilized. Bill?
This is, like you said, this is Bill Wilson. He was trying to keep people sober in New York City. He was running around pulling people out of bars, dragging people off park benches, that kind of thing. And he couldn't get anybody to stay sober. But he stayed sober himself. And he went home, the story goes, and he talked to his wife and said, I'm going to try to stop helping people because it's not working. And she said something that probably saved all of us. She said, what do you mean it's not working? It's working for you, dummy. He didn't even realize it, but that was keeping him sober, trying to help other people stay sober. And then when he went out to Akron and he ran into his business deal fell apart and he was feeling all bad and dejected and depressed and he was ready to go thinking about picking up a drink, he realized that if he carried the message to another alcoholic, that would keep him sober. He remembered back when he was in New York trying to help people get sober. Even though he didn't get anybody sober, it kept him sober. So that's basically the whole meat and potatoes of this program. You try to help another alcoholic stay sober or achieve sobriety, and that's what's going to keep you sober. That's really the whole meat and potatoes of the program. That's what it's about. It's not about me keeping me sober. It's about me trying to help somebody else stay sober, and that's what keeps me sober in turn. Okay, the next paragraph on the bottom of page XVI. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery.
Yeah, so this is just reinforcing what Bill was just talking about. The physician tried other means of recovery, meaning Dr. Bob, and to no avail. He was trying things with the Oxford group. He was going to church and was failing miserably. Bill was starting out and trying to talk about more of the spiritualness of it to begin with as his start. But Dr. Silkworth at one point told him to talk about the medical side of it, the things that actually are bad for you from drinking. And so he adopted that approach, and that was what was successful with Dr. Bob. So Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. So it basically gave Dr. Bob the means by which he utilized that to recover. So it reinforced another thing here, and that is that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. And it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And again, we talk about this as a means to your recovery, but not so much. It's not about you. It's about you helping somebody else, is what Bill just talked about. Bill?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, the Dr. Silkworth told Bill to stop talking about the spiritual stuff and give him the medical business, and that's what he did when he ran into Dr. Bob. That's who the Akron physician is, Dr. Bob. He gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism. He told him that when he takes a drink, he won't be able to stop. That's the physical part, the phenomenon of cravings. And when he does stop, he'll be restless, irritable, and discontented. That's the mental part. Our brain is driving us crazy because we don't have a drink. And when he explained all of that to Dr. Bob understood it. Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group. According to Dr. Bob's story in the back, for 2.5 years, he was trying to use the Oxford group to stay sober, and it didn't work because he didn't identify with any of those people. The people that were in the Oxford group in Akron, they weren't alcoholics. They were just people trying to be saved and go to heaven. And Bill was an alcoholic, and when Bill gave him the description and told him what happened to Bill, Dr. Bob identified with him. That's what's important, that we get the alcoholic to identify with us. And if you're an alcoholic and you're talking to an alcoholic, you'll both identify with each other. And it says also, it indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. If you want to stay permanently recovered, it's vital to work with another alcoholic. Vital means your life depends on it. Air is vital for life. Food and water is vital for life. Vital means it's something that you need for life. And the work in Alcoholics Anonymous is not me going through the steps. The work is me helping someone else get through the steps. That's basically what it's about. Okay, the next paragraph. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time.
Right. So we're talking about AA number 3. That's Bill Dodson. His story is on page 182 in the big book. So they started out very, as they say, frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward at Akron City Hospital. The very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. And again, that's Bill Dodson. He never had another drink, and this work at Akron continued through the summer. Bill stayed on for a couple of 3 months in Akron and was able to help establish the first group within AA there in Akron. They weren't successful. They had a lot of failures, and it's interesting that they kept going. And when the broker returned, well, I keep saying broker, I apologize. When Bill returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time, which was, again, the Akron group. Bill?
Yeah, like you said, this is AA number 3 that they're talking about here, Bill Dodson. His story is on page 182, and they also mention him in the last chapter of Vision for You. And basically it says he recovered immediately. In other words, when Bill and Bob went and talked to him in the hospital, this is the man that they know as the man on the bed. And when they went and they talked to him and they helped him get through steps 1, 2, and 3, he's recovered immediately and he walked out of the hospital a free man. That's how powerful this stuff is. And then they talk about the first group was formed. When they first formed the first group, they didn't know it. They didn't have like a grand opening or anything. They're looking back on it and say, we actually had a group started then. At the time, they didn't realize it because they weren't trying to start something. They weren't trying to start AA. They were just trying to stay sober. Bill and Bob would just wanted to stay sober, and they knew they had to help another alcoholic in order to stay sober. And it just took off from there. That's basically where the whole thing started. All right, you want to keep going or you want to stop here?
We'll stop here. It's 12:59. Actually, it's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and stop. Bill, thank you very much for your assistance here with me and partnering on this. I really appreciate it. We close out with the Serenity Prayer. That is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Stop the recording.